My daughter was 3 weeks old, 3 weeks. I hadn't even stopped bleeding from the surgery. My body was still healing, my hands were still shaking, and I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since she was born. And on that day, I walked into a courtroom holding her in one arm and signing away my marriage with the other hand. While my husband sat beside the woman he loved more than us. He didn't even look at our daughter, he looked at his watch. My name is Maeve, and what I'm about to tell you isn't something I read online or heard from a friend of a friend. This happened to me. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly how a broken woman, holding a 3-week-old baby with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a lawyer she could barely afford, brought down a man who thought he owned the world. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from absolutely nothing, type the word strength in the comments right now. I want to know I'm not the only one. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe because this story gets darker before it gets better. Stay with me until the end, you will not see the twist coming. I met Desmond Voss when I was 26 years old, working 2 jobs and barely keeping my small apartment paid for. He was everything I wasn't: wealthy, confident, the kind of man who walked into a room and the room rearranged itself around him. I'll be honest with you, when a man like that looks at you like you're the only person in the building, it's intoxicating. I felt chosen, I felt safe. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see then. Men like Desmond don't fall in love the way the rest of us do. They collect things, and for a while I was something beautiful he wanted to collect. The courtship was fast, dinners I couldn't pronounce the names of, trips I never imagined for myself. Within 8 months he proposed in front of 200 people I had never met, and I said yes before I even processed the question. I remember calling my best friend that night, crying happy tears, telling her I'd found my person. What I didn't notice, not for a long time, were the small things: the way he'd raise an eyebrow when I spoke too long about my old job, the way he'd suggest I stop seeing certain friends because they were not good influences, the way my opinions slowly started feeling optional in conversations that used to include me. I thought he was protecting me. I didn't know he was isolating me. We got married in a ceremony that made the local papers. I wore a soft ivory gown that took 3 fittings to get right. I remember standing at the altar thinking, this is the beginning of my whole life. It was, just not in the way I imagined. 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I'll never forget the way my hands trembled holding that test. I cried in the bathroom for almost 20 minutes before I worked up the courage to tell him. He smiled, he hugged me, he told his family before he told mine. For a moment, everything felt perfect. If you've never married into a powerful family, let me explain something to you. The money isn't the hardest part, the people are. My mother-in-law, Alina, made it clear from the very beginning that I was a guest in her son's life, not a permanent fixture. She had a way of complimenting you that felt like an insult wrapped in silk. You're so down to earth, she'd say at family dinners, glancing at my modest jewelry next to her diamonds. It's refreshing, really. His sister, Margaret, was worse. She'd ask pointed questions about my background in front of guests, smiling the entire time, like she was doing me a favor by humiliating me politely. As my pregnancy progressed, Desmond grew more distant. Meetings ran longer. Phone calls happened behind closed doors. He missed my second ultrasound appointment because of a critical deal, and when I cried about it that night, he told me I was being emotional because of the hormones. I sat alone in that waiting room, watching other couples hold hands while a technician moved a wand over my stomach, and I remember forcing a smile for the nurse so she wouldn't ask questions I didn't have answers to. I told myself this was simply what life looked like married to a man who ran 6 companies. I told myself plenty of women managed marriages like this. I told myself a lot of things that month. I started noticing small things I couldn't explain. A second phone that wasn't his work phone, kept in a drawer in his study that was always locked. A perfume on his jacket once that wasn't mine, something floral and expensive. Late-night messages he'd silence the second I walked into the room. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself pregnant women get paranoid. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative was too painful to sit with. There was a woman who worked for the family, Greta, who had been with the household for almost 15 years. She caught my eye one afternoon while clearing the table and hesitated like she wanted to say something. "Be careful who you trust in this house," she said quietly, and then walked away before I could ask what she meant. I followed her into the kitchen, my heart pounding. "Greta, please, what do you know?" She glanced toward the hallway, checking it was empty, then lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "It's not my place, ma'am. I need this job. I have a family of my own to feed." Her eyes were kind but scared. "Just watch the study and watch the calendar on Fridays." That was all she gave me. I didn't push her further. I was 7 months pregnant and terrified of what the answer might be, and some small, cowardly part of me preferred not knowing. At my baby shower, the whole family smiled for photographs. Billionaire gave a toast about welcoming a new generation into the family. Margaret hugged me and called me sister for the cameras, her perfume sharp and floral, eerily similar to the scent I'd found on Desmond's jacket weeks earlier. I told myself it was a coincidence. Expensive perfumes all smelled alike, didn't they? I smiled in every photo. I didn't know that the people clapping for me that day already knew things I didn't. I didn't know they were already preparing for a future that didn't include me in it. I went into labor on a stormy evening. I called Desmond 4 times before he answered, and when he finally did, he said he was in an important meeting and would try to get there. I labored for 11 hours with my mother on speakerphone from 3 states away because she couldn't get a flight in time, and a kind nurse held my hand through the worst of the contractions because there was no one else in that room to do it. He arrived 2 hours after our daughter was born. I named her Arya. She had his eyes and my stubborn chin, and the second I held her, every fear I had melted away, at least for a moment. I remember pressing my lips to her forehead and whispering that I would never let anything hurt her, a promise I had no idea I would have to keep so soon. I remember looking up at him standing by the hospital door, phone still in his hand, and thinking something I never wanted to admit to myself. He looks like a man checking a box, not a man meeting his daughter. He stayed for 20 minutes. He took 1 photo for what I assumed was his mother, kissed my forehead like an afterthought, and told me he had calls to return. I watched the door close behind him and held my daughter a little tighter. The first 3 weeks of Arya's life were a blur of exhaustion, healing, and a growing unease I couldn't shake. My body hurt in ways no one had warned me about. I was up every 2 hours feeding her, stitches still tender, barely sleeping, while Desmond was rarely home. When he was cold, distracted, present only in body, scrolling through his phone at the dinner table while I tried to tell him how Arya had smiled for the first time that morning. One night while he was in the shower, his work phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't trying to snoop. I genuinely wasn't. I was simply sitting there nursing our daughter at 2 in the morning when the screen lit up with a message preview I couldn't unsee. "Can't wait to see you Friday. Tell her you have a meeting." My stomach dropped. I sat there holding our 3-week-old daughter, staring at a screen that confirmed every fear I had buried for months. The locked drawer, the perfume, the missed ultrasound, Greta's warning about Fridays. It all clicked into place at once, like a wall I had been quietly building finally gave out. I confronted him that night. I expected denial. I expected an apology. Instead, I got something far worse. Silence, then a cold, flat voice. "You knew exactly what kind of man I was when you married me." He said it like it was my fault for expecting loyalty, like betrayal was simply part of the agreement I'd signed without realizing it. I stood there in our bedroom, our daughter asleep against my chest, and felt something inside me go very, very still. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. He straightened his cufflinks like this was an inconvenience rather than the end of everything I thought I had. Then, almost casually, he said her name. Camille. I'd seen her once briefly at a charity gala months earlier. Beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who photographed perfectly without trying. I asked him how long. He told me 2 years. 2 years, our entire engagement, our entire pregnancy, every ultrasound he missed, every late night, every locked drawer. When I went to his mother, hoping for some shred of support, Billionaire looked at me with something close to pity and something closer to disgust. "Marriages like this require patience," she said. "Perhaps you were too naive to understand that." She wasn't shocked, she wasn't surprised. She already knew. The next morning, Desmond's lawyer called mine. He wasn't asking for a conversation. He wasn't asking for reconciliation. He wanted a divorce, fast, quiet, and on his terms. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted me gone, quietly, without a fight, while I was still healing from bringing his daughter into the world. The morning of the hearing, I dressed Arya in a soft cream onesie and wrapped her in a blanket because the courthouse was always freezing, and I wrapped myself in the only thing I had left. Resolve. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. My body still ached. I had no team of lawyers, no army of assistants, no family name behind me. I had a young lawyer named Ms. Hartley who took my case because she believed me, not because I could pay her what I should have. Walking into that courthouse, I felt every eye on me. Whispers followed me down the hallway. People who once called me family at holiday dinners now looked away when I passed. And then I saw him. Desmond walked in wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking exactly like a man who had already decided he'd won. And beside him, sitting close, dressed in a stunning rose gold gown like she was attending a celebration instead of a divorce hearing, was Camille. She wasn't hiding anymore, she didn't have to. She sat there like she belonged there, like she'd already moved into the life that used to be mine. Billionaire sat 2 rows behind them, her expression unreadable. Margaret wouldn't even meet my eyes. I held Arya a little tighter and took my seat. That's when Ms. Hartley leaned over and placed a thick folder on the table in front of her. I hadn't seen it before, I didn't know what was inside. "Don't react to anything yet," she whispered, "just trust me." I had no idea that folder would change everything, not just for me. For him, too. The hearing began the way I expected. Desmond's lawyers painted me as unstable, overwhelmed, unfit to handle the responsibilities of his world. They suggested I was after his money. They suggested I had married him for status, conveniently ignoring who had been the one to vanish for 2 years behind a locked study door. I sat there quietly, Arya sleeping against my chest, absorbing every insult like it was nothing new. Then Ms. Hartley stood up. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She opened that folder and began presenting financial records that Desmond's team clearly weren't expecting to see. Transfers, properties, accounts that had been quietly opened over the last 2 years in amounts that didn't match any business explanation he'd ever given. And then came the detail that changed the entire room. Camille wasn't simply the other woman. She had a connection to one of Desmond's biggest business rivals. For 2 years, sensitive information about his company had been leaking out at exactly the moments his rival needed it most. The woman beside him hadn't just been sleeping with my husband. She had been using him. I watched Desmond's face change in real time. The calm, untouchable expression cracked for the first time since I'd known him. Camille's smile finally disappeared. She thought she had won. She didn't know she was about to lose everything, too. The room shifted after that. Desmond's lawyers asked for a recess. The judge denied it. What followed was nearly an hour of testimony, documents, and a kind of public unraveling I never thought I'd witness. Staff members, including Greta, came forward with statements about what they had seen, what they had been instructed to hide. Greta's voice shook as she spoke, but she didn't stop. "I tried to warn her," she said, glancing at me once. "I should have said more." Billionaire's name came up too. It turned out she had known about the affair almost from the beginning and had quietly helped cover travel records and align alibis to protect her son's reputation. A printed itinerary, one she had personally arranged for a business retreat that conveniently overlapped with one of Camille's trips, was placed on the screen for the entire courtroom to see. When the judge asked her directly if she had known, Billionaire hesitated for the first time I'd ever seen. "I was protecting my family," she said. "Which family?" the judge asked. She didn't answer. Margaret, who had spent years making comments about my background, sat in the back row in complete silence, her perfectly composed exterior finally cracking under the weight of a truth she could no longer dress up politely. I watched her stare at her own hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes, including her mother's. Business partners who had been quietly watching the hearing from the gallery began stepping out to make phone calls. By the time the second hour began, news of the leaked company information was already spreading. Desmond's empire, the one he had built his entire identity around, was starting to crumble in real time, in front of the very people he had spent years impressing. I watched 2 men in tailored suits, men I recognized from his own board meetings, quietly gather their coats and leave before the hearing even ended. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood slowly, Arya still resting against my shoulder, her tiny fist curled against my collarbone. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I simply told the truth. I told them about the locked drawer, about the missed ultrasounds, about being told I was too emotional for noticing what was right in front of me. I told them about laboring for 11 hours while he sat in a meeting that turned out not to exist at all. I told them that I had given this man my entire life, and in return I had been handed silence, secrecy, and a folder full of evidence that proved I had never truly known him at all. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't have to. The truth was loud enough on its own. The judge's ruling came faster than I expected. Full custody of Arya was granted to me, with Desmond ordered to provide significant financial support calculated not just on his income, but on the hidden assets Ms. Hartley had uncovered. The court also referred the leaked business information to a separate investigation, one that would follow Desmond long after that courtroom emptied. Camille left the courthouse alone, no driver waiting, no designer coat to shield her from the cameras that had gathered outside once word of the scandal spread. The man she had used and who had used her right back didn't even glance her way as they walked out through different doors. He once told me I'd be nothing without him. That day, holding our daughter, walking out of that courthouse with my head high despite every ache in my body, I proved exactly who I was without him. Elinor didn't say a single word to me as I passed her. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked smaller than I remembered. It's been a while since that day. Arya isn't 3 weeks old anymore. She's growing into a curious, fearless little girl who has no idea how close her story came to starting in the shadow of betrayal instead of strength. I rebuilt my life slower than I expected, but more solidly than I ever imagined. I went back to work. I leaned on the few real friends who never left and on Greta, who eventually left that household for good and still checks in on Arya every birthday. I learned slowly that my worth was never something a man with a big enough bank account got to decide for me. Desmond's empire never fully recovered from what came out that year. Camille disappeared from the social circles she had clawed her way into. Elinor and Margit send the occasional formal card for Arya's birthday, polite, distant, the way strangers do. I don't think about that courtroom often anymore, but when I do, I don't remember the humiliation of walking in with a 3-week-old baby while my husband sat beside his mistress. I remember walking out. If you stayed with me until the very end of this story, thank you, genuinely. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to fight for your child's future completely on your own? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell because next week's story is even more shocking than this one, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Take care of yourselves, and remember, sometimes the worst day of your life is just the beginning of the strongest version of you. I'll see you in the next story.